Welcome to Tuesdays with Turbine, the refresh. I'm Lee Fatzinger, CEO of the 2020 Colorado Companies to Watch winning AI-powered jet stream riding Turbine Labs. Today's episode is a mouthful, and we're most certainly has been written by a marketer helping sales and marketing work together in a contactless world. Our guest today, and I'm paraphrasing, has one of the most fabulous job descriptions. Carol, she's the CMO at a CMO firm that helps CMOs CMO more. That's my goal, Carol. I just want to let you know to one day have a job description like that. But seriously, Carol Everson, CMO for Chief Outsiders, thanks so much for joining Tuesdays with Turbine, the refresh.
Happy to be here.
So Chief Outsiders is a company that helps other companies understand marketing, how all of these pieces of sales and marketing connecting fit together. And you really just bring that entire package as an outsourced company internally to that organization.
Correct. There are about 75 of us, all former CMOs, and that's what we do. We love it.
That's a lot of marketing people in the same space.
Yes, it is.
I can't even imagine what it would be to go to a trade show with everyone from Chief Outsiders. But let's dive right in.
Great.
We're going to be covering big shifts that are happening this year in buyer behavior that were kind of being set up early in the year. We're going to be looking at new approaches to how marketers are thinking about things and sales teams and the other executives that they're connected to, because it's all really interconnected. And then we're going to talk about how many different tools there are out there and this app culture that we have versus the technology that's available. And then, yes, we still have to have people, even though it's this programmatic digital sort of ad-driven world. And then I'm going to complain about some stuff for a little while, Carol, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's get started with a volume check first. So, Carol, the folks back at the Turbine point our AI platform out there into the media and the public conversation space so we can quickly understand the importance and the impact of a topic. This is what we do for our customers every single day of the year, and it's certainly not getting any less busy with the amount and volume of information that's out there. But TikTok has been in the news as of late. Carol, you're familiar with TikTok, I assume?
Sure.
Right? This is the immensely popular app where you take a YouTube video and you turn it on its side so that you're dancing sideways to some Harry Styles tune, and then you get 3 million views. That's TikTok, right?
Yep.
So TikTok is expected to be fully illegal in the United States on November 12th, but it's expected, and this is as a result of an executive order that the President of the United States signed several weeks ago, and now things are going back and forth, and this app that was just supposed to be these irreverent, cute videos is now deeply involved in the regulatory environment, the political environment in the United States. But we're expected that by the time November 12th happens, that the company's U.S. operations will have been purchased or they're gone public, maybe by Oracle, and then we can resume our TikToking and we'll be kind of back. Because really, I mean, if you think about it, when everyone's under quarantine, you know, we were able to TikTok. It was kind of the only thing we were able to do because no one could go out. And so you could just get some, you know, a can of Lysol and a broom and you could stand there in your living room and you could dance. But here's what I think is pretty fascinating as we pointed the Turbine at this topic is let me just ask you, how many articles do you think, Carol, have been published about TikTok in the last 30 days? So these are like media articles.
Wow. If I were to guess, given the importance of it, I'd say 50,000.
Wow. Okay. I'm just going to, you're new to this volume check thing. 326,295 articles have been published. That would take a human being from now until really the end of time or the election cycle, whichever you prefer to have, you think is going to be longer. But here's the really interesting piece is, according to the Turbine Labs platform, you got more than 300,000 articles, but how many of those articles were actually relevant and impactful as it relates to TikTok? Not just that they mentioned it in passing, but how many articles do you think were relevant and impactful?
Well, it depends on what you mean by impactful, but I maybe 20,000.
Okay, 758.
Oh, wow.
0.002%. And the same thing kind of happens on Twitter. I won't make you guess anymore because you were nice enough to join us. We're going to talk about really interesting stuff. But
And I'm a bad guesser, so yeah, good idea.
can you imagine? No, but like 6.3 million tweets have been posted on this topic, and just over the last 30 days. But I found this very interesting. The most impactful publications among all those tweets actually came from The Economist, as well as Turbine Labs' latest publishing partner, Reuters. And so we're going to move on, but I wanted to tell you, I first heard about TikTok on a trip to China that I had, business trip last summer. I downloaded the app. I spent about 5 minutes on it, and then I realized it was actually 2 hours that I'd spent it, not 5 minutes. And the technology was just too good at keeping my attention, so I had to delete it. But I did leave China, I think, with the entire contents of my phone and some server back there, but that's a different topic. So let's dive in to the agenda. Again, thanks so much, Carol Everson, for joining us. Take me back to Thursday, January 2nd, 2020. Not you, but someone is a senior level marketer at a mid-sized to large company. The hangover from the New Year's wearing off. You just came off of this go-go decade. The reputation of your brand is looking pretty good. Impressions are up. Everyone's sort of, falling in line. Even the Fry Festival seems like it was a distant memory, if everyone remembers that. But you got, things are looking good. As a marketer, are you aware that in January that there are long-term systemic changes on how buying decisions are going to be made? And I ask because, as you stated in some of our prep calls, that the research is now stating that 65% of a buying process is actually complete before a buyer even engages with the company they're going to be engaging with. So look, what's happening in January 2020? It seems so long ago.
It seems forever ago. Specifically in B2B, in business to business, what's happening is the shift has been occurring where, with all of the information that's online, companies no longer need to rely on the salesperson as their total source of information and source of truth. And in fact, if you dig deeper into the data, Gartner had one of the reports that was published, what you'll see is that they don't trust the salesperson as the sole source of truth when they're trying to sort out the options that are available to them. Salespeople confuse them because each talks about their product in a different way, and it's really hard to do an apples to apples comparison. So what's been happening in the business world is they go to online. And some companies are prepared for that. Those that are digitally savvy are set to handle that, but a lot aren't. So they aren't prepared to not just be there in paid search. That's one thing, is to be there in paid search when someone's looking for you and to show up online. But there's a lot more to it than just being there and saying, I'm here. You need to be establishing your brand and your company as expert in an area that's going to matter to your buyers. So you have to understand what's important to the buyers, be establishing your expertise, and then downstream have all the comparison tools online that people need. That's not been happening across the board. And as a consequence, sales is getting harder. It's harder to just wait for the inbound traffic to come. And at the beginning of the year, a lot of companies were in the position where they understood that and they were starting to address it. Some had very effectively, many more had not. And that was the challenge coming into the year, is the systemic decline from just sales calls on me and I buy to, I don't even know if I want to talk to you. I'm not even looking for you because I found 5 other companies that I think are interesting, as opposed to I'm going to call my 4 or 5 people that I know.
You mentioned earlier in your statement about the notion of a salesperson being sort of that first line of contact that isn't really realistic anymore. Do you think that if for some if by some miracle a salesperson were fully informed about their offering, all the offerings of their competitors, that would change? Or is this just something that, in other words, if I could trust that a salesperson was going to tell me everything that I needed to know was going to be objective,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a salesperson, you're a salesperson, so this is not about honesty or dishonesty, it's just saying you only have so much capacity to know
Right.
everything that's going on out there. Does this happen anyway because of just the nature of information? In other that mistrust of saying I can't just rely on one person at a brand to solve my problem. I need to have my own team and lots of other stakeholders be involved in the information gathering and decision making process.
Yeah, and what's interesting, you have to look at it both reactively and proactively. Reactively, yes, some people will have the relationship with clients that they'll always be able to build business through those relationships. But as you grow and as you attempt to grow, you need to be able to show up in a way that others who don't know you will bring you into their consideration set, so that it's not just relying on one-to-one existing personal relationships, which will always cap how fast you can grow. That's on the reactive side. On the proactive side, companies that establish their expertise and become known as expert in an area way before when I need you will be top of mind when I do need you. So you don't want to wait until it's time for the buying cycle to start. You want to start your process of being an expert in the field that matters well in advance of anybody's buying decisions, so that naturally you'll be one of those considered, if not one of the top considerations, just because they know your company happens to be expert at X, whatever X is.
So you can imagine that this transition, this evolution,
Mm-hmm.
and brands understanding that buyer behavior is really shifting and that it's becoming much more distributed and in some ways much more democratized, that this on January 2nd, hangovers there, bought my plane ticket to Cannes for my award and all that stuff. And then COVID hits.
And then COVID hits on top of this. Yes, on top of this trend that they're already dealing with, and many are not prepared for, COVID hits. Yes.
And so does that change the trajectory, or does it accelerate, or does it amplify? Because if sellers weren't prepared back then in February, certainly something is different. But is it an acceleration of this change? Is it an amplification of this change? Here we are, and now it's February, March. And so what has happened to that process that was really evolving through last year, and savvy marketers are starting to prepare and lay the groundwork for that? Could you have anticipated that even if this kind of a shift were going to happen, that this is going to the new way of doing business is going to happen? Or what was the change? Was it accelerated? Was it amplified? Or did it somehow change trajectory?
It's definitely put some of the challenges and the transitions on steroids. And when you look at the changes that have happened from a sales perspective, along with me having relationships, that was built from personal interaction, meeting with people, going out for drinks and dinner and lunch. And I don't mean in a soft way, I mean in a business way, having business conversations through the combination of entertainment, meetings, going and meeting people at events, trade show booths, all of those personal touches, whether it's in the office or it's surrounding, the outside hours, that's huge from a sales perspective, and that just got cut off. I have friends in the trade show industry, their revenues have gone down by 80, 90, 95%. 80% of folks in one company I spoke with have been laid off because the trade shows have gone to zero. And I think everyone understands that even when we have a vaccine, people won't go running to, get into those crowded environments for a period of time. So this is going to last for at least a couple of years. We find that, and the conversations I've had with people, I've been doing a lot of research on this with some clients. They're really concerned about the conversations that need to happen, and how do you really dig into that conversation and have that deep understanding of the capabilities that you're trying to bring out. What is it that you do to fill the gap, because you're just not going to be able to have those discussions in those in-person venues. That also slows down the pipeline. For some industries, trade shows are really key, and their pipelines are just drying up, and they're trying to figure out, well, how do I fill the pipeline? The struggle that they have is it's really hard to fill a pipeline with outbound calling and emails when you were getting people naturally in an environment where they were engaged in your topic at, say, a trade show floor.
I have to say that I am not looking forward to going and shaking hands with 500 people anytime soon, and I can't imagine when that's going to happen. I agree. It's also critical to sort of state that even in the marketing plans last year, that the buyer behavior is changing. It's becoming more democratized, but you still made certain bets. The booth for CES,
right,
electronic show in Las Vegas, that was purchased. The trade show that happens in Barcelona, Spain for the Mobile World, Mobile World Congress, that was those were all investments that were already made. And then in March, this stuff is sitting in crates. Maybe it's in transit. Maybe it's still floating somewhere. But now we really have changed the dynamic. The other piece of this, marketing is a 70-year-old, call it an industry, call it a competency, call it art, science, whatever. But there's been more change and acceleration in the last 10 years, it seems, than in the first 60. So here we are, it's March, we're all in our bunkers, and sales and marketing teams have got to figure out some new approaches. So as we understand that the shift in buying behavior has already happened, and that was the groundwork for that's been laid for a while. And now we're trying to figure out how are we going to address this now? And the world is changing, the change is accelerating, but you can't do things the way you did them before. And you got to get creative.
Yes.
And so some companies have been able to do some really interesting things that say, okay, well, we can't go over here. We can't do trade shows when we used to really rely on them, but we can do this. Give us some examples of some of the really unique things that you've seen companies doing to accommodate for this shift or this acceleration in the buyer behavior process.
Sure. And I think I'll back up just a step and explain that before that can happen, you have to have a fundamental thought process, which is the way we were organized and who had responsibility for what in an environment, especially in the B2B world where it's purely sales led, that has to be revisited. It's so important that everyone understand that in an environment that is now remote, that is virtual, and that is digital, the role of the salesperson, the role of the marketing team needs to shift. It will vary by business. Different businesses have different needs, and so you can't say one size fits all, but it's seriously important to take a step back and say, which tool, marketing or sales, let's start at the highest level, marketing versus sales, which tool is right for what part of the problem? Once you get to the point that you realize there are some things that can be done with automation and with technology and without having to be there in person or on the phone, you're in a position where you're able to say, okay, let's give marketing this piece of the job and let's let sales take this piece of the job. I'll take a boring example, but I think it's a good example first. I was at a company where we were marketing subscriptions, media subscriptions, and literally we had salespeople owning the renewal cycle for customers that had $400 per year subscriptions. We had people calling 6 months before the subscription was due to renew, and it was an annual renewal. You can only renew once a year because of the platform. 6 months ahead of time, they start making phone calls to get renewals for a $400 annual subscription. And they did that all the way through until 2 months after the renewal date with their different waves of calls. we talked about it and realized really the marketing team should be doing on-site messaging, the marketing team should be doing email marketing, doing everything you can to minimize the cost of bringing those renewals over so that the salespeople could move up market and start working on enterprise sales. Mm-hmm. And it took us a couple of years to get everybody in line that we were going to make that change. You had compensation issues, we've been doing this for 40 years issues. So that's a low tech, but I think pretty relevant example of the need to shift the mindset. Just because this is the way it used to be doesn't mean it's the way it should be looking ahead. And it just takes, thinking a little more openly. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, does that blur the line somewhat between what a marketer would have traditionally done as a competency and what a salesperson would have done as a competency? Does it blur the lines a little bit? And one of the things that I found striking about your statement is that you make the assumption that that sort of happened, but you can only imagine that was a number of heated arguments over hours of Zoom calls to say, we have to change this process, and sales, you're not going to do that anymore. And sales saying, no, that's my territory. And marketing saying, but I can do it a lot cheaper. And then you're not getting closer to a synergy. You're getting further away from it. So I think go ahead. I would love to just hear your thoughts on that.
A couple of thoughts on that. My first thought on that is you're right that traditionally sales and marketing have this rub. They can have a rub. It is interesting that depending on which part of which type of industry you come from, it's more or less of an issue. If you're coming from a consumer-based environment, I worked at AT&T and MasterCard. When you're coming from the consumer end, marketing's used to having accountability and responsibility and revenue, and it's not confusing, and everybody's comfortable with that, and marketing tends to own the segments, and there's no issue there. You might have some channels with salespeople, but marketing even typically decides what the channels are that you use in that environment. On the B2B side, that's where you start blurring the lines and changing the responsibility. And what I have found, there are two things I'll share that I think are relevant and interesting. I worked for one company, and my CEO of the division was a former NFL pro football player. And he had this wingspan that was just like the length of a conference room table. But myself and the head of sales came in to meet with him my first day. He brought us in, and he said, I'm going to tell you guys one thing right now. The two of you are a team. You're going to work together. You own the revenue together. I never want you saying it's marketing's leads. I never want you saying sales won't sell what I'm putting on the table. He said, I never want to hear it. I don't want to talk about it. Go away. And because he set the tone, it was so easy for the two of us, which I think we would have anyhow because we got along really well. I think we would have, but he made it crystal clear. Don't do an end around. Don't come running in to talk to me about whatever so-and-so is not doing. Get the job done. The two of you own it together. Another example that I think is really relevant, I worked at a company that was PE backed, and there were a couple of different companies that were in the portfolio. I noticed in one company, the CMO was brought in on every single business review, and the president of that company really relied on the CMO. Even though both were B2B companies, the president relied on this one, and on this one, not at all. And the CMO oftentimes didn't go into the board meetings. This one sold many, many multiples. This one's still trying to be sold. So what it suggests is if the leadership is smart and if they want to get the best out of both functions, you look at the two together and you force them to work together and you optimize across the two. You don't put one or the other, especially in the B2B world, you don't put one or the other in charge. It's two very different functions that can be really, really, really synergistic if you force that to happen. And
that starts with the leadership of the company, though.
Yeah, it sure does. It does. And you can try to push it up, but unless it can happen bottoms up, but you have to have a really great head of sales and a really great head of marketing. It's interesting, and you can do that. You should be able to do that. Like as a head of sales and head of marketing, it's two adults in the room. I had he was at one point the vice chair at MasterCard, but before that he was the president of Americas. And when I was working there, he was talking about the fact that the team you are on is more important than the team you lead. And at the time, I think it's a Covey 7 Habits thing. And at the time, I argued with him. I was like, no, I think it's more important that you're leading the team. He's like, you don't understand. He said, if I'm not aligned with so-and-so, what happens down in the organization? You guys fight, you kill each other. He said, right. It's so important that you're aligned. So if sales and marketing are aligned, whether the CEOs, they'll get the CEO there if the two of them are aligned. If it doesn't come tops down, it's just key.
So those are process examples. One of the other things that I have found interesting and seen is how companies are trying to get creative in the notion of let's bring the trade show to the attendee, right, in a new way. And so we're seeing technologies like virtual reality and augmented reality that deliver an experience, but it is not a Zoom experience.
Right.
When can I get that?
So I've been working with a company called VizSource that is building out this type of functionality. I'm sure others are as well. And it's really interesting if you think about it. We were looking at what the different scenarios are where there was a need, and the trade show space became a very obvious need. So the key is the organizers of the trade shows need to decide that they want to host something different than a Zoom call. As we've looked at it, we think the first phase of this will be Zoom for like all of the breakout sessions and maybe even for the keynotes. But when it comes to the trade show, first of all, the sponsors for event organizers are really important to them from a financial perspective. And these Zoom calls are not helping the sponsors get business. It's just not delivering. So the notion of having a VR experience where you can go from booth to booth to booth as if you're in the booth is really helpful in terms of engagement. Some of the cool things that you can do in this world are, you no longer are confined by the trade show floor. You're no longer in a situation where sitting on that trade show floor, you have this much space to work with. In a VR experience, you could go all the way down so that you're like inside a chip, or you can be looking at a freighter and have that in your experience, be able to walk around on the deck of a major ship in a shipping experience. So what you can do in the booth is so much more interesting than what you can do in a physical booth. Mm-hmm. The key is, can you find a way to connect the seller in an appointment within the VR experience? And that's been worked out. You can do that. And then the second is there a way to make sure that the infrastructure is in place so that all parties can participate? That's coming soon. I'd say by next year, because everyone understands, and I'm sure there are others that are playing in this space, everyone understands the time sensitivity, the importance, and buyers need to connect with sellers and understand what they're selling. And they can't, I'll give you another good example. We had a conversation with a company that sells play sets. And this company can't demonstrate their products right now. And they have huge products. They can't ship a play set out to a potential buyer. Even if that buyer's at Walmart, they can't just ship them a play set to their backyard of their house. So how do you look at the 5 or 6 different types of play sets? And as a buyer, how do I buy when I can't experience what I'm trying to experience? So you've got the combination of trade shows, and then the very same experiences can be used in one-on-one sales situations with major buyers. And I would see a lot of this hitting. I know there are some trials underway, and I would imagine pretty soon, by early next year, we'll see some stuff.
If you think about, I don't know if you remember a company I think it was called Second Life.
Yes. Way
back when. And it was really sort of your online persona, and they were attempting to build commerce pre-Bitcoin and experiences of shopping and living and meeting new people in a virtual world. I think IBM ended up buying whatever that was the original part of that business for $100. It's exaggeration, but it didn't work. And it didn't work because the audience had to be very, very specialized.
Mm-hmm.
You've always seen sort of these gimmicks of trying of how to make connections more richer in a trade show, in a meeting environment. But really, everybody ends up going. They get their brochures, they have their meetings, they get drunk, they
Right.
collect a bunch of business cards, they make some LinkedIn connections, and they go home until the next time around.
Right.
And that's an entirely different discussion about is that a great way to spend your money or not, but not for today. Do you think that the VR and the AR, it sounds really compelling because the technology is there, and you're exactly right to say that there are certain things that you can do in a VR and AR environment that you simply can't do in an in-person setting. You can't dive down the fourth layer of some chip.
Right.
Would that have come anyway, or is this only happening because we can't travel anymore?
Well, when I talk to folks at VizSource, what they've said is that they've been playing. They were involved in Second Life. They were users and playing around with it back in the day. And in fact, my partner at Chief Outsiders, because we do outsource work with different clients, she was actually involved in the marketing of Second Life. So I was paired with a real VR expert from our company when I was working with these guys, and what we found is that was before its time. One of the big deals, one of the big issues, this was coming because the headset technology is much better. You don't have the vertigo and the nausea that people had before. Even that's still there a little bit, but the new Oculus headset that's come out, Quest, is getting rid of that. In a couple years, it'll be sunglasses, but for now, it's much improved headsets at a price point of say $300 a headset versus $1,000. So it's much easier for a user to get access to it. The actual platform that exists out there, the building of the actual experiences used to be 2 or 3 months. Project manager, $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 to get a halfway okay experience. They can be built in a week, and for some fraction of the cost that's been done, if there are VR or if there are 3D renderings out there. So it's easy once the renderings are there, and if the renderings aren't there, it's pretty easy to create those with the right company, with the right processes in place to be able to take these creative ideas and turn them into a VR experience. And now you've got a lot more in terms of dashboards and platforms and processes, and enough people, enough technologists out there that have been building in this space that they can actually turn this stuff around pretty quickly. So this company, for one, and I'm sure others, were looking at this already and saying it's time to commercialize for business purposes. And what changed was COVID that just pushed them faster. They were already there. They were already talking to us, actually. And then this just took it on, like the escalator, if you will.
I can't wait to experience a trade show. It's going to be a little harder to experience Barcelona in the way that you would in a VR headset, but I think it's the time is right now for something like that. But let's talk about.
Can I throw one more thing in that's I think pretty cool? On the consumer side, I don't think we're as far along on the consumer side, but if you think about like the consumer events and festivals, we spoke with a lot of folks that are involved in that space. They were already thinking about how to use VR in just the activations. And it sporadically, you might have a vendor that puts a headset and an experience at one of those big festivals, and people go in, they're like, ooh, that's cool. So now they're looking at this and saying, okay, that's really interesting, because if I can't get my brand if I can't show you something interesting as a sponsor, why are you going to pay attention? I might even be able to build an experience where you can see how the tequila is made, or how the blue jeans are made, or something really different that you would never have experienced on a trade show or in a physical activation at a concert. So there's some cool stuff they can do there. And back to not Second Life, but the gaming world. I don't know if you're aware, there was a Dave Matthews concert that was put on in, I forget which game it is, but it was put on in, I can't think of the name of the game, actually run through a gaming platform with over 1 million concert attendees sponsored by Verizon. So Verizon gets the credit during this period of time when young millennials are starving for some engagement, of, especially in the March, April timeframe, just starving to connect with people. And Verizon facilitated that through this experience that they did. So I think there are just situations like that that are out there that are going to be super cool.
Well, I both as a Dave Matthews fan, I would watch a show with a million other people that I didn't have to be, in an amphitheater with. But the tequila one, that's really the one that I want to see. When you think about connecting all this stuff together, there's this publication out there, and each year they try to assemble all the marketing technology companies into one visualization. I've seen, you've seen this chart. Candidly, I have no idea if Turbine Labs is on it. If we were, we wouldn't be able to see it because there's something like 5,000 other logos of companies on that sheet. So the amount of fragmentation in terms of putting all this together in a way that works for your business is next to impossible.
Yeah.
Too much, right? Massive amounts of.
Yes.
Is it? Have you seen it work? Can it work with all these choices out there? Right, like U2 has a song, and one of the lyric in it says, freedom looks like too many choices, but that's not true in the marketing world.
I've seen it work well, and I've seen it work not well. And it also, again, it's always going to be very situation dependent. I think the big consumer brands have it down to a science because the money that they're dealing with is just so extensive, and the impact. And the fact that the e-commerce platforms, for example, are absolutely owning the revenue stream. I think in that sector, the technology works well. The MarTech experts, the marketing technology experts, and the marketing operations folks have got it down to a science, and it's working exceptionally well. On the B2B side, in particular, it's harder. First of all, the budgets aren't the same. And secondly, there are so many options available, and you tend to at times have, especially with smaller companies, you'll have, my favorite tech, or my favorite toy, really. What ends up happening is like an exec gets pitched something by somebody will say, well, why aren't we using XYZ functionality?
And then you add the next little toy, and then you add the next little toy, and then you add the next little toy.
And then none of them work together, and then there's frustration. And so I think what really I have seen where it works on the B2B side is where you lay out what exactly am I trying to accomplish, and what are the tools that make the most sense for that specific assignment. And there will always be other alternatives. So you can't get too hung up on, do I have the most current tool? It's got to be, do I have the right tool that delivers on this specific assignment? I'll give you an example of one that I think is interesting. I'll give you a couple examples. There are technologies out there to help companies fill the top of their funnel. There are tons of technologies out there, everything from intent, behavior solutions to account-based marketing solutions to lead generation solutions. You have to understand the nature of your business and where you're trying to take your business, and then decide which of those tools to take and which ones to use. If you're a very transactional business, go for paid search. If you are a business that is selling something that requires some thought, then you're going to need to look at something that's more content marketing related. If you're trying to sell into a large corporation, I was in one of my jobs trying to sell into a company. I had 22 people on the buying cycle, of which all 22 could say no. And at best case, they would either say yes or I won't stop it. But if even one of them said no, just one no out of 22, it was dead. So then you have to say, well, how do I get 22 decision makers engaged? That's where you pull in the right kind of technology to do a combination of thought leadership and then surrounding the buyers with an account-based marketing solution. So for each, the key is to not get caught up in the intent marketing, ABM, whatever. It's what's my business challenge, and then get someone who actually understands the various techs that are out there to help you say, these are the pieces to put together. And then the most important thing is the connection of the data layer that goes behind it. Because if you don't have that, you'll be doing stuff, but it'll just be random acts of marketing. You won't be actually making something happen because you can't measure it and you don't really know what's working, what's not working. So you're just throwing stuff out there.
Well, first of all, Carol, that's, I think, hugely important and insightful for all of our viewers and listeners, because it seems as though the complexity was already at a breaking point, and now we have an entirely new environment with all kinds of new tools, all kinds of new technology, and the ability to just sit down and think about, what are we trying to accomplish? What is the intent internally to the organization? How are teams going to work together? It comes down to fundamentals. So I greatly appreciate you providing the insight. As you can see here now, there's a big box, and it's a box that is filled with soap, which is not a B2B product, although I guess it could be. And I think I want to leave, especially after all the insights that you've delivered. And one of the things that I think is really hampering the companies that we see, larger entities that have marketing and sales teams that are trying to work together, is that the notion of a fundamental is somewhat gone away because of all the selection and all of the choices that we have in these tools. And it's very, very interesting. There's a site out there that's called Product Hunt. You've probably seen it before. And the job of Product Hunt, it's an incredible website you could spend all day on, just like TikTok. But the idea is that every time that there's a new product that's out there, this is a place for you to highlight it. We've used it before. We've seen other tools that have used it before. Big companies use it, small companies use it. But one of the things that is also showing is that there's no shortage of innovation at the product level that you can consider when you're thinking about building this stack of marketing tools, marketing automation, the connection between a sales team and a marketing, and really a solution that at the end of the day shows that you've done good things for your brand. But at the same time, you really just have to stop and say, what are we trying to accomplish? And then getting some help to say, these pieces fit in. You probably don't need all of these different things. You can do this, but make sure that they're tightly integrated. Make sure that you understand what each cog in the wheel is doing, and then continuously reevaluate based off of changing market conditions, what's happening in the world, so on and so forth. So Carol Everson, Chief Outsiders, thank you so much for joining us. Next on Tuesdays with Turbine, we're going to be super excited to have Amber Wynn, who is a diversity and inclusion expert, and Sarah Evans, founder of Sevens Strategy and PR, join us for a discussion on diversity and inclusion. But again, Carol, thank you so much for joining us on Tuesdays with Turbine, and to everyone else, we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.